What was the weirdest rule you had to follow in school? Story 1. We had a hallway only for 6th graders in middle school. It was really strange because it was in the middle of the entire school, but if any teachers found you there, you were sent to the principal's office. Someone added to this comment by saying, "Teacher here, we've had to implement this rule this year due to non-stop bullying and harassment of our 7th grade students by a large portion of the 8th graders. It was brutal. They were like psychological ninjas. We simply couldn't stop every incident, since apparently these kids planned out their attacks and split-second timing, used diversions, and knew each teacher's pattern of behavior like it was their job. Our hall only has 7th grade classrooms, so we figured there was no real reason an 8th grader would need to be in the hall anyway. It's a little inconvenient for them to cross over through the lunchroom, but it solved a lot of problems." Story 2. In my old primary school, their solution to every playground accident was to put a fence up. Child tripped on a tree root, put a fence around the tree. Child slipped on some mulch in the garden, better set up a 6-foot-high perimeter around the entire garden. Oh, what's that? Someone pushed another student off of a bench-high ledge? Let's put up spiked stockade-style poles to prevent that from happening again. It got so out of hand with so many playground restrictions that parents started insisting the removal of most of them. It's cool that the school wanted to keep the kids safe and all, but putting up a fence every time something happened seemed a bit much. You know? Like they were trying to make the playground totally risk-free, which is just not possible. And so the playground ended up looking like a jail yard instead of a fun zone for kids. No wonder the parents were like, "Hey, can we maybe dial back on the fences a bit? Too many rules and restrictions just kill the vibe." Story 3. In middle school, we weren't allowed to clap during assemblies because the vice principal thought it was too disruptive. We could only do jazz hands. This seems like a rule that was made up just because it was secretly hilarious to watch a room full of teenagers do simultaneous jazz hands with deadpan face expressions. Story 4. No running in the schoolyard or playground during recess or lunch. How the hell do you expect to stop 500 children from running while they're out playing? Someone replied to this comment by saying, "I had the opposite. Run as much as you want, but don't stay still. Monitors bothered me so much with that. I didn't want to move too much when the ground was in ice because once a kid was sliding a patch of ice, bumped my legs and made me fall pretty hard on my head. I ended up in the hospital for a neck injury. I was in pain for 2 weeks and now I hurt my neck very easily. It's not like I was fat or didn't move around every other time." Story 5. They didn't allow the boys to have doors on the bathroom stalls in high school. They let teachers use those bathrooms. Nothing like walking in on your 300-pound history teacher dropping a deuce. Someone added to this by saying, "The same rule was enacted in my high school for 2 weeks. It had to stop after a large group of boys would get together during class and wander from bathroom to bathroom finding people who were taking a poop and then yell, clap, and cheer them on for pooping." Story 6. In my district, there was some situation at one school where some kids got into a fight and all called their parents, and the parents ended up having a knockdown dragout. Because of this, they made a rule that we weren't allowed to bring cell phones into any school in the district. Not leave it in your locker, not turn it off and leave it in your locker, not even leave them in the office all day and pick them up at the end of the day. You weren't even supposed to have one in your possession. But this was an urban school district that didn't do neighborhood schools, and some of the schools, including mine, were located in sketchy areas. Almost no one had cars or rode to school in them, and only a handful had school buses. The rest of us got free passes to ride the city buses. Yep, they basically told us to ride the public buses through sketchy areas, sometimes well after dark in the case of extracurriculars, without any kind of emergency communication, because clearly, if a couple of teens misuse their phones, it means the tens of thousands of other students in the district can't be trusted either. We all ignored the rule. Half our parents actually encouraged us to ignore it, because they were more concerned about our safety than some stupid rule. Most of the school staff ignored it unless they actually caught someone using it during class. We had security checks like twice a year, and everyone knew how to hide their phones for those. My senior year, they changed the rule from may not possess or use to may not use, display, or activate cell phones. My best guess is they either got tired of dealing with the amount of hassle that came with confiscating everyone's phone, or enough parents finally complained. Man, this school district had a real problem on their hands. Kids getting into fights and parents getting involved? Yikes. But their solution to ban phones altogether was just crazy. I mean, it's not like phones are the problem, it's the people using them. Good on them for changing it back eventually, but it took way too long. Hope they learned a lesson about trying to solve complex problems with simple solutions. Story 7. Because of gang affiliations, we were banned from wearing 3 items of red or blue. Things got a bit hairy on school spirit days where they encouraged us to wear our school colors, red, white, and blue. Story 8. I had severe kidney problems when I was in secondary school. The rule was that once we were in the yard, you couldn't leave the yard until break or lunch was over. Like they literally locked the gates to stop you from leaving once in the yard. I had multiple arguments with teachers for not letting me go to the toilet, then getting moaned at in classes for asking to go or being late. That's just cruel. If a child has problems with their organs, they should be allowed special permission to use whatever facility they need to. I bet you a hefty sum that if those teachers were diagnosed with kidney problems, there would be no fuss over when and how often they use the bathroom. Story 9. My high school started to do a school shooter drill twice a semester my senior year. They had a dude come in the front door during lunch, blow an air horn, and shout, "This is a shooter drill, run!" He had a water gun and would shoot kids with it and then tell them that they had been killed. Me and my friends casually finished our lunch as he shot us and then left out the kitchen side door to leave the building. Half the senior class ended up leaving as they had this guy go through half the school and through the freshman center over the course of half an hour. It was pretty ridiculous and happened several times, usually during lunch. Story 10. When I was in elementary school, we had a rule that kids were strictly not allowed to touch rocks. No rocks, no pebbles, not big rocks, no rocks. I got put in timeout a few times for touching rocks. The problem was our playground was built on a pebble pit. If you fell or wanted to sit on the ground to play, you could very well be singled out and punished for touching rocks. It was a huge tattle fest too. Kids would catch others touching the rocks and run to tell the PE coaches, who would immediately interrogate you. Did you touch rocks? Tell me the truth. I found a really cool rock in the first grade and decided to show it to my coach. I told her it looked like an alligator's skull. She smiled at me, took the rock, and chucked it as far as she could, then bitterly told me, "Don't touch rocks. If you kept touching rocks, you'd be made to walk around the playground in circles, sometimes until you had sufficiently learned your lesson." I once walked in circles with a few other kids until the playground time was over. It felt like forever, but it was probably like 15 minutes. I'd say the no rock rule is a bit ridiculous. The playground was filled with pebbles, and it was almost impossible to avoid touching them. Yikes. And if you kept touching the rocks, you'd have to walk around in circles until the bell rang? That sounds like torture. It's no wonder kids remember it as a negative experience from their school days. Story 11. Our high school got a wild hair up their collective ass when we were spending too much time in the bathrooms. So they tried to set up a bathroom schedule where you could only use them during certain hours of the day without a pass. And to get a pass, you had to convince a member of the staff that you really had to go. They had staff members guarding the bathrooms to make sure you had a pass to use the bathroom. It wasn't until a combination of classroom walkouts, bathroom sit-ins, citations of laws, parent complaints, and several insinuations that the rule was somehow racist that they gave in and rescinded the rule. Seriously, what is it with schools forcing restrictions on bodily functions? Does this type of thing only happen in America, or does it happen elsewhere too? Let us know in the comments below. Story 12. In elementary school, we had a stoplight in the cafeteria that was linked to a decibel meter, allegedly. If it got too loud during lunch, it would go from green to yellow to red. Red meant silence for like 5 minutes. Any noise would cause you to miss recess. Someone responded to this comment by saying, "We had one too, and if it went to red, we had to be silent for like 5 minutes also." It only lasted a few days because my friends and I would purposefully sit under it and scream. The cafeteria ladies, who had nothing to do with the light in the first place, ended up turning it off and it was never turned back on. Story 13. In any case, when I started high school, the entire school was open campus for lunch. That year, however, some of the sophomores were acting up off campus, so our principal, in his infinite wisdom, decided that starting the next school year, it would be open campus only for juniors and seniors. Think about this. The sophomores, who had caused the trouble, who then became juniors, and therefore this rule didn't apply to them, weren't punished. But us freshmen, who became sophomores and weren't the ones causing the problems, were punished for what they did. So I had open campus my freshman, junior, and senior years. It was closed my sophomore year. I still think that was unfair. Story 14. Before I describe what actually happened, I need to explain something about weeples. Weeples are, or were at the very least, these little balls of fluff about the size of golf balls. They're often festooned with googly eyes, hats, plastic feet, or any number of other accessories, making them look rather like a crafting project undertaken by a group of 5-year-olds. Weeples were fairly coveted items when I was in 6th and 7th grade because you could earn them as a reward for selling magazine subscriptions through this fundraising event that the school held every year. And if you had the right Weeples, you actually had the chance to win a fair amount of money in one of the daily contests. If none of this is making much sense, don't worry. It was difficult to understand back then as well. Basically, you'd get different varieties of Weeples for selling different amounts of magazine subscriptions. Then every day, each Weeple-bearing student would be allowed to pull a piece of candy out of a hat. If the candy had a sticker on it, the student would win a certain amount of money. That amount would be multiplied by each Weeple that they owned, plus an additional multiplier for... Okay, you know what? None of this is important. What is important is that certain members of the school faculty viewed this entire event as a way of threatening or bribing some of the students. There was one young woman, for instance, who was told that she'd be set up to win $50 if she gave up her spot in some contest or another, so that the teacher's son could take her place. Another student was told that his winnings would be confiscated if he didn't take responsibility for the fire alarm having been pulled. Nothing really terrible happened, at least nothing that I heard about, but there were enough shady dealings to make the entire thing seem pretty damned unpleasant, even for those of us who weren't really involved. The twisted punchline to the whole affair came about when one of the students offered another an affectionate favor in exchange for Weeples, and when folks found out about the deal, only he was suspended. Not as you might think because of his involvement in the exchange, but because it was explicitly against the fundraiser's rules to share or give away Weeples. Story 15. High school. If you weren't seated when the bell for the class rang, you had to go to the cafeteria for in-school suspension for that period. Didn't matter if you were in the classroom, didn't matter if you had already sat down and were now up to sharpen a pencil, didn't matter if your backpack was stuck between someone else's desks and you were 3 minutes into trying to unwedge it. Happened to me. You had to leave class, go sit quietly in the cafeteria, do nothing, and not learn. It was so stupid. It's like they don't even think about the rules and punishments that they give students for minor infractions. It's almost like they don't care and just want to look like they know how to discipline students and get test scores up so that they get more grant money and, hey, wait a minute. Story 16. The high school I went to had mufti, no uniform, which is exceptionally rare for Australia, at least before they became a senior campus and introduced a uniform. You weren't allowed to wear singlets or tank tops, both guys and girls however, which just seemed really absurd to me. Thinking about it now, it gets to 40+ degrees Celsius here, so you just had to swelter. Why even have mufti if you enforce overly conservative rules? Then, on the flip side, when they introduced uniforms, they didn't introduce any warm clothing besides a super thin blazer, so you just had to suck it up and freeze your tits off during winter, which drops to about 5 degrees Celsius, or get carded if you desperately wore a warmer non-uniform jumper. Story 17. In my elementary school, you weren't allowed to stand up and go to the bathroom, playground, throw away some trash, or even just pick up something you dropped without permission from the lunch monitors. And if you didn't eat enough of your food, then they wouldn't ever give you the permission. Like one time, my sister and I were sitting on either side of our friend, and she wanted to get my attention, so she tried to tap my shoulder. But I guess when she did it, she kind of lifted off her seat barely, and one of the ladies saw and started yelling at her and put her in timeout. It also happened to me a few times. I've also cried a lot of tears because I hadn't eaten enough of my food, so I couldn't play. The rule about staying seated at lunch in this elementary school is just too strict. It's like the students were being watched all the time, even for simple things like taking a bathroom break or picking up a dropped item. Talk about adding pressure to an already stressful school day. And if you didn't eat enough, no playground time for you. That's just harsh. I can imagine all of this made lunchtime a pretty unpleasant experience for a lot of kids. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a story you'd like to share, please leave it in the comments below for us to read. Then be sure to like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so that you know when our next video is available. For more videos like this one right now, please stop by our channel. I'm